There is a village in America today which is also the America of yesterday. It serves the present by preserving the past. It is a village where things happen daily as they did in an earlier era. Also, it is a scene of special events which dramatize our history. Here you see the Muzzleloaders Festival, which authentically reminds us of the American ideals tested by the war between the states. Old cars, vintage cars, painstakingly and lovingly restored. They are proudly driven by people to whom they are more than machines. They are mechanical pets, part of the family. These active antiques are brought under their own time-resisting power to this village in America. What stories they tell of life in our country when the motorized wheel was just beginning to show its rubber heels to space and time. Did you ever dance around a maypole? They do in the country fair of yesteryear, where all eyes are on the horses and their riders, and on the bicycles Americans used to ride. How'd you like to nurse a little lamb? You can at the country fair. When you need more milk, you can go right to the source and take a hand at milking the cow. The lost art of wood carving can be rediscovered at the country fair of yesteryear. And when our grandparents were young, they enjoyed shows like this. A village called Greenfield. A public affairs presentation of WWJ-TV. In commemoration of the 40th anniversary of Greenfield Village, where American history comes to life, and the simultaneous 90th anniversary of the Edison incandescent lamp, one of the most important discoveries in American history. This is a village called Greenfield. Located on a 200-acre site in Dearborn, Michigan, it comprises nearly 100 original and reconstructed buildings, transplanted from various parts of the United States and Europe. It is a unique, self-contained community formed 40 years ago for an idealistic purpose. It is also America's first outdoor museum. The village, like the nearby Henry Ford Museum, is part of the Edison Institute, chartered in 1929 to advance the cause of education and to demonstrate the development of American arts, sciences, customs, and institutions. The charter was signed by Henry Ford I, his wife Clara, and their son Edsel. Special recognition of the Edison Institute as a registered Michigan Historic Site came in 1963. The historical marker stands just west of the entrance to Greenfield Village. The name comes from the township in which Mrs. Ford was born. It's now a part of metropolitan Detroit. The village green is bounded by buildings that symbolize the political, religious, and social and everyday life of 17th, 18th, and 19th century America. The general store traditionally has been an American social center, as well as a marketplace where goods might be bought, sold, or bartered. Built in 1854 in Waterford, 40 miles north of Detroit, and re-erected on the green in the late 20s, the general store has some articles remindful of the past for sale now, such as penny candy of all varieties. The coffee mill, where your coffee was ground from the beans when you bought it, is not really extinct, as many coffee fanciers will attest. Most merchandise dates from the gold rush in 1849. In those years, the family flag was cut individually from a whole bolt of flags. Next to the general store is the Clinton Inn, built in 1832, It was the first overnight stage stop on the Sauk Trail from Detroit to Chicago. At the north end of the village green stands the Martha Mary Chapel. Built in 1929, it was named for and dedicated to the mothers of Mr. and Mrs. Henry Ford. On the green near the chapel stands the Scotch Settlement School, typical of schools that operated a century ago in Michigan. Built in 1861 on Warren Avenue east of Southfield, it was attended by Henry Ford starting in 1871. The structure was moved to the village in 1929, where on September 16th, classes were begun. The interior is restored to appear as it did half a century ago, and the teacher's desk on the rostrum is a replica of the original. The school was in everyday use throughout the academic year for children of the 6th grade until June of 1969, when it was closed as an academic institution. On the left rear desk are the initials of Henry Ford, which he carved in 1929 at the village dedication. The Logan County Courthouse is not an imposing 19th century structure, but it serves a meaningful purpose, reminding us that no American has been more universally awarded the mantle of greatness than Abraham Lincoln. Originally the first courthouse in Logan County, Illinois, it was built in 1840 and was brought to the village green in 1929. Lincoln himself practiced law here. Many of the furnishings are intimately associated with him, some coming from Lincoln's Springfield home. This is how a courthouse looked to the aspiring young lawyer from Illinois as he made his name as Honest Abe. Recent research has disclosed that 6 Empire armchairs in this room were made in the 1830s by a Philadelphian named Abraham Bouvier, an ancestor of Mrs. Jacqueline Onassis. Also in this room stands the rocking chair in which President Lincoln was seated, his playbill of Our American Cousin, and the shawl he was wearing in a Washington theater when his life was taken from him and his nation by an assassin's bullet. The Town Hall, symbolizing 19th century local government and community affairs, completes the village green. Modeled after traditional structures, it was completed in 1930. What is a village without homes? Greenfield Village contains a representative residential area showing how Americans lived during the past 3 centuries. The 17th century Cotswold group was dismantled, brought over from England, and rebuilt to show the way of life Americans inherited from Europe. Across the lane from the Cotswold group stands the Cape Cod Windmill, said to be the oldest in America. The oldest of the American homes in the village is the nearby Plimpton House, whose history goes back to Sudbury, Massachusetts in the 17th century. The building is a one-room structure with a small loft above used as sleeping space. All the activities of the typical colonial family were confined to just one room. The Plimpton House points up Henry Ford's goal in establishing the village: to excite in the imagination of young America a proper regard and respect for a national and historic background, that the United States was cradled in simplicity and reared on privation, toil, inventive genius, and creative personality. The Susquehanna House, which now stands in Greenfield Village, was built in the mid-17th century in southern Maryland. It was one time home of Christopher Rousby, a tax collector for King Charles II. The furniture is not original to the house, but is appropriate to the period. The pieces are of both American and English origin. The Susquehanna House came to the village in 1942 as a gift from its owner, Mr. S.D. Young, in memory of his late wife, whose ancestors included the Rousbys. Another of the village homes rich in our national heritage is the Noah Webster House, built in New Haven, Connecticut in 1822 and moved here in 1937. It was in this second-floor study that Noah Webster did much of the labor that resulted in publication of his Dictionary of the English Language in 1828, an international landmark in lexicography. Webster, born in Connecticut in 1758, followed many careers as attorney, journalist, educator, legislator, and judge before settling on lexicography. Manuscripts in Webster's hand and early copies of his works, including his revision of the Bible, are on the mantel, table, and desk. While this secretary desk is not originally from the Webster house, it actually was once owned by the great man of words. About 160 years old, it is cherry with satinwood inlay. In 1839, Webster mortgaged this house to pay for a second printing of the dictionary, which at first was a critical success but a financial failure. And it was in this room in 1843, at the age of 85, that Noah Webster, America's first lexicographer, breathed his last. If the Noah Webster house in Greenfield Village has an American literary background, then certainly this home has a place in the world of music. The Stephen Foster Memorial moved here from Lawrenceville, Pennsylvania in 1934. It is either the house in which America's first great popular songwriter was born on July 4th, 1826, or the house next door. The home contains many heirlooms of the Foster family, presented to the village by descendants of Henry Foster, Stephen's older brother. Furnishings typical of its period grace the Foster Memorial, which is a two-story, 7-room house. Foster had great natural musical ability. As a child, he learned to play the piano and flute. He also had a fine baritone voice. The music on the piano is a first edition of Jeannie with the Light Brown Hair, a composition inspired by Foster's wife. The flute on the chair actually belonged to Foster. Perhaps it was on this very instrument he first played Beautiful Dreamer, Oh Susanna, Camptown Races, Come Where My Love Lies Dreaming, or Jeannie with the Light Brown Hair. Yes, we're still in a village called Greenfield, and we're watching the wood-burning stern-wheel steamboat, the Suwannee, churning around the Suwannee Lagoon, whose shores are adjacent to the Foster Memorial. This scene was filmed prior to an unfortunate incident which occurred in the spring of 1969. At that time, the Rouge River spilled over into the lower reaches of the village, and when the waters suddenly receded, the Suwannee suffered damages at its dock. However, it is now being rebuilt, and the Suwannee, whose design dates back to 1880, is expected to resume its popular circular runs in the spring of 1970. In addition to its buildings and furnishings, a village called Greenfield houses many industries and crafts whose heyday has long since vanished. However, as Henry Ford said, the farther you look back, the farther you can look ahead. So village activity includes trades practiced in the 17th century home and in small shops which flourished following the Industrial Revolution. Glass blowing is a highlight of the village crafts. Portions of the Sandwich glass plant in which this fascinating demonstration takes place date back to 1825 in Sandwich on Cape Cod, Massachusetts. In that plant, imported English, Belgian, and German glass blowers helped Americans produce the finest glassware available in this new nation. While we watch the glassblower deftly work, let us remind you of some of the other shops and mills that are active at the village. The print shop, which symbolizes the small printing establishments of early America, prints many of the village publications. At the Phoenixville Post Office, a structure which originally did business in the 1830s in Phoenixville, Connecticut, visitors may send out mail bearing the Greenfield Village postmark. And by the way, these visitors to the village and Henry Ford Museum now number more than 1,400,000 annually. They are drawn by the wide variety of Americana offered, encompassing 3 centuries of history from the homes and buildings and the shops and mills of the crafts and industry to the special events that take place at various times during the year. What you are seeing right now is not a special event. Glass blowing is demonstrated regularly at the village, which, like the Henry Ford Museum, is open the year round. During much of America's history, the clothing that Americans wore was made right in the home, from the thread to the finished garment. The Plymouth carding mill, originally in Plymouth, Michigan, contains devices that show the evolution of weaving. Carding, shown here, is the process of disentangling the fibers of cotton or wool by the action of a wire-toothed flat surface. It's the first important mechanical operation in the treatment of fibers, preparatory to making yarn. The next step after carding is spinning, the twisting together of a number of fibers so that they are wound into one strand. The spinning wheel shown is a so-called great wheel, or wool wheel, which had a great vogue from colonial times to the middle of the last century. In this wheel, the twisting motion is applied to the spindle by a string belt from a large drive wheel. Wheels like this one were often made at home by our forebears, to whom do-it-yourself was a necessity and not merely a hobby. Once you have thread, the next step is weaving that thread into fabric. What you are seeing is how 18th century America made cloth for clothing, small rugs, and other items of wool or cotton. Called a hand loom, this device involves foot power as well for interweaving the threads forming the warp and the woof. Outside of plain cloth, only simple patterns based on different thread colors can emerge from the hand loom. Weaving looks more complicated than it is, while spinning looks easy but is harder to learn. Incidentally, lessons in weaving for children and adults are now being offered at the village. Candle making was an important household craft in the 17th and 18th centuries because of the importance of candles in lighting homes. Here we see candles being made in the kitchen of the Susquehanna house. The three varieties made and sold here are bayberry and beeswax, two fragrant types, as well as the odorless pure white spermaceti candle. The process used is molding, which is said to produce the best looking candles. While candles are made in the kitchen of the Susquehanna house during the summer, they're produced during the rest of the year at the candle shop in the Henry Ford Museum. Candle making is still done in many American homes, mainly as a hobby. Ever watch a blacksmith work? You can when you visit the Cotswold Forge in the village. A part of the Cotswold group from England, it was built in the early 17th century and restored in the village in 1930. Originally, it served as a blacksmith shop, produced wrought iron objects, and was the scene of iron repair work. And that's substantially what its function is today as part of the village craft program, except that the horseshoes made are souvenirs. Other souvenirs available include rings forged from nails. The blacksmith works in what's called the old manner. His most important tool is his hammer, and it takes a good deal of skill and experience to produce the desired effects on the heated metal. Incidentally, the occupational name blacksmith is derived from the color of the metal iron. There's a railroad line that occasionally brings special groups of visitors to the village, and the train stops at the Smith Creek Depot. It reminds us that midway in our history, the Industrial Revolution set the 19th century apart from all centuries before it by substituting mechanical power for muscular power in transportation. The depot is one of several buildings which recall the life and times of the great inventor, Thomas Edison. It was moved here from its original location 10 miles south of Port Huron, where in 1863, Edison the boy was thrown from a train for accidentally setting baggage car afire. The 15-year-old lad had been experimenting with chemicals at the time in a sort of preview of his future career. Another building in the Edison group, Mrs. Sarah Jordan's boarding house, was the home of several of Edison's workmen in Menlo Park, New Jersey. It was the first residence lighted by Edison's incandescent lamp. The Edison collection will give the dominant note to the museum and all its activities, said Henry Ford. Ford believed Edison, whose statue faces the Menlo Park Laboratory, was the greatest man of the century, and was personally grateful to the inventor for encouraging him in his early efforts to perfect a gasoline-engined car. And this is the Menlo Park Laboratory, the key structure in the Edison group. It was built in 1876, and here Edison spent what he called his 10 golden years of invention and achieved the brilliant discoveries that literally electrified the world. As his tribute to Edison, Ford had the building brought here from New Jersey and reconstructed as close to the original as possible outside and within. Everything was and is authentic. Instruments, apparatus, and chemicals. The laboratory, the main place of research, was the scene of development of many innovations in addition to the incandescent lamp. The first phonograph, the microphone, and telephone transmitter were developed by Edison in this building, utilizing equipment shown here. But the center of attention, of course, is the Edison lamp. While seated in this chair on October 21st, 1879, Edison watched the world's first practical incandescent lamp glow for 40 hours. 50 years later, with the restoration of the Menlo Park Laboratory complete on the village grounds, Henry Ford combined the dedication of his indoor and outdoor collection of Americana with a celebration of light's golden jubilee. The first successful filament, found after countless failures, was carbonized thread on the right. Later filaments were the more durable carbonized cardboard center and the even longer burning carbonized bamboo on the left. Let's go back in time 40 years at this very same location to October 21st, 1929, as Edison, aided by one of his original assistants, Francis Yale, recreates the invention of the electric light for President Herbert Hoover and Henry Ford.
That's very good now, that vacuum. You can give it some current. There, old fellow.
One of the great tricks about that was to get the air out. We used to see them off too quick. By bringing them up very high, it pumped out an enormous amount of air. I've already got that in the mistake. We had 2,000 of those running once. Not a bunch of them. Then we had the outwards got a pump, like a meat screw, that run the mercury up there. Then later years they got a pump, a real pump. But that wouldn't carry far enough, so they put some phosphorus in it.
I'll give you more current.
That's enough. Out for all practical purposes, that's enough.
Yes.
See it all.
Yes, we'll see it all. We'll call it last.
Well, sir, with that little invention, you multiplied the light in the world by 1,000-fold. And all the world is giving you honor today for that very great service to all humanity.
Immediately after the event you just saw, Mr. Ford had Edison's chair nailed to the floor as it is today, a silent witness to history as it was made and reenacted by a truly great man. Here, standing in Greenfield Village at the birthplace of Henry Ford, is his grandson, chairman of the board of Greenfield Village, William Clay Ford.
This is a unique museum of American history. It is the largest, most comprehensive collection of Americana to be found anywhere. It represents my grandfather's idea of how the history of this nation could most effectively be told. He felt that we could best understand the America of today if we knew more about the America of yesterday. He was especially interested in individuals whose contributions have made life better for all of us. Men like Thomas Edison, Abraham Lincoln, the Wright brothers, and many others who are represented here. He knew the importance of understanding our nation's past, for it was on that past the future is built, today and in the years to come. We shall continue to make every effective use of this vast historical resource to bring American history to life. We hope to inspire in every American who visits here a greater awareness and appreciation of the heritage of this great nation.
As a highlight of the 40th birthday celebration, Mr. Ford has announced a $24 million expansion program for the village and museum. In this unique community, which recollects so vividly the America of earlier times, there are 4 buildings specializing in timepieces. The Sir John Bennett Jewelry Shop houses the commanding figures of Gog and Magog. Guardians of the past, they keep the time in a village called Greenfield. A Village Called Greenfield was a public affairs presentation of WWJ-TV in commemoration of the 40th anniversary of Greenfield Village and the simultaneous 90th anniversary of the Edison incandescent lamp. We wish to thank the Greenfield villagers for their cooperation in the production of A Village Called Greenfield.